Very quick introduction, really. My name is Sarah Pawson. I'm one of the directors at Fruition IT. For those that don't know who Fruition IT are, we are an IT recruitment agency, obviously specialising in tech and change. We have had the pleasure of working with Clive and Clare for a number of years now at Sky Betting and Gaming and Asda. And they have very kindly offered to share their words of wisdom with us all this afternoon, which I'm looking forward to. Lockdown Learning is a series of webinars that we've been running for the past couple of weeks. I think given the situation that we've all found ourselves in, and I guess the fact that lots of the meetups that we're all used to attending aren't happening at the moment, we wanted to make sure we were bringing the tech community together wherever possible, and also, I guess, give something back to people that have supported our business over the past however many years, either as a client or as a candidate. So this is our 6th webinar, I think, and we've covered lots of really interesting techie topics that go completely over my head, such as OWASP top 10 for serverless. There was a JVM event last night, and these events are really well attended. We've been getting about 50 to 60 people for each webinar, so that's been great. So that's who we are, and that's why we're doing what we're doing. I will introduce our guest speakers now, and Clive and Clare, can you unmute yourselves?
Hi.
So Clive is Head of Talent Acquisition for Sky Betting and Gaming here in Leeds, and is a very prominent figure in the tech community and tech hiring space. And Clare looks after all tech and head office recruitment at Asda. Clare also has a wealth of experience in this space. And I guess the objective of today's session is to really get a bit of an insight from you both in terms of what the new is going to look like, because I think we all recognise and appreciate that companies' hiring strategies are going to be very different moving forwards. And just if we can, I guess, kick off with the first question. I guess if you want to take it one at a time or together.
Sure.
I guess, what do you think is going to be the biggest change to your hiring strategy at Asda and SBG post lockdown, and then I guess maybe longer term than that? What changes do you anticipate will happen?
At my end, I think there's going to be a complete change in the market. We're going to return back to a market that's we've never seen before. It's going to be not like even a recession from 10 years ago. Social engagement has changed. We've all been locked down at home. I think candidates' behaviours are going to change a little bit as well. I think we've become a little bit more quiet. We're only interacting with our own families. We're a little bit less engaged. We're all, shall we say, zoomed out, and perhaps becoming a little bit more introverted. I think also we're going to have to think as a talent team is about social distancing protocols. You know, we're going to have guidance from our businesses on when can we conduct face-to-face interviews and meetings, the right things to do, even right to work checks where we normally meet a candidate up front and in person to check their right to work. Are we going to be able to do that? And also, our candidates going to be reluctant to attend interviews face-to-face until it's safe to do so. But I think the thing we need to put forward first is people's health, and that includes the candidates as well as our hiring managers as well.
So I guess in the short term, Clive, I know lots of organisations have had to put recruitment freezes in place, which is understandable. But once these recruitment freezes are lifted, then do you think you'll adopt more of a virtual approach to hiring?
Yeah, we're looking at doing virtual hiring similar to our virtual onboarding. There'll be more interaction with candidates over video. Candidates will be used to this because those people that are still working will be interacting with their teams over video as well, and even people that do quizzes, say, with their families at a weekend. I think previously we've been a little bit reluctant as companies to embrace video interviews. We've done it in the past with candidates overseas, and even our hiring managers have never been that much in favour of it. But I think now, because we're embracing the technology, it'll become part of our business as usual. And I think obviously candidates will want to do that rather than having to come into the office to meet people. But we're also going to build in, when we start rehiring, there'll be interaction with the recruiters, obviously by video interview, interaction with the hiring manager. But then after that, we're going to put in an additional step where you'd actually meet the people that you're going to be working with, or the people in a team or squad, and that would be over video as well.
Okay. And have you gone through this process with anybody through lockdown so far, where it's been a complete virtual hiring process?
We filled one role recently for a sound engineer in our core gaming business in Solihull. The candidate was successful, actually lives in France at the moment. So all interactions been by Zoom, and they've had a session afterwards, after their face-to-face interview, with the people in the team that they're going to be working with over Zoom as well, to build those relationships. I think the thing that companies need to make sure is we give candidates that interaction with the teams and squads, because normally if you came into a company for an interview, you'd probably have an office tour, there'd probably be additional people that would come in and out of that interview, and you might not always get that over a Zoom interview. So you do need to make sure that if you go into a company they don't offer that, I would definitely suggest to your recruiter, is it possible I can have a conversation with some of the people I'm going to be working with?
Yeah, that's really important, isn't it, I guess. And what about at Asda, Clare? What does the new strategy look like in terms of what you know so far?
So we've carried on hiring. We have put some of our positions on hold, but a lot of the tech positions are going ahead. We've probably onboarded so far in the last 6 weeks, because I've been part of the onboarding project as well. We probably onboarded about 40 new colleagues into the business.
Okay.
So we've kind of seen some of the kind of issues that we've been having. The biggest issues is around tech and equipment, and again, making sure that we're keeping those new colleagues and our existing colleagues really safe. How do they pick equipment up? If they're isolating within their family, what do we do about that? So we, as a tech team, we have really put some really new processes in place. So for all new colleagues joining the business, they will have a designated slot on a Monday morning between 9 and 12 that come in, pick up their equipment, get all their equipment set up, and then leave and go home straight away. So the whole process takes about 15 minutes.
Sure.
The challenges that we're seeing is around then how do we train the colleagues? How do the colleagues feel when they've not got that person sat next to them training and helping them? Do they feel that they're a burden to the team? How do we ensure that we make them part of that team? And that's by doing the meetings, the Zoom meetings, setting up on WhatsApp groups, having little coffee chats, putting in like little quizzes and things to try and keep them as engaged as we can and as part of the team. But I think that is going to be the challenge, and it's the kind of feedback that we've been getting from new colleagues is that I think at the moment they feel that they're a little bit of a burden because they're probably not up and running as fast as they could be.
Yeah.
So that's kind of some of the challenges that we've seen. So we're working on that, and we're setting up Zoom groups as well for all new starters, not just in tech but the whole of home office, so they can talk to other people about how they're feeling, what's worked for them in the team, what hasn't worked for them in the team. And then it's a big challenge for the training department as well, about how instead of it being on-site training, how do they do now online virtual training and do it in masses as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think overall we've got through quite a lot of the technical issues. Going forward, it has been discussed that we will not be going back to BAU. We will not be putting colleagues set in certain departments in certain areas with a specific desk. It will all be desk, kind of maybe little pods. We're not quite sure how it's going to work yet, but most colleagues will be working from home, probably I'd say 3, maybe 4 days. You might get some working from home full time. So I think that's the biggest changes that we're seeing.
Sure. Okay, so obviously we're expecting that demand is going to increase in the market because there's probably going to be more candidates that might find themselves out of work. And I guess people their applications need to stand out from the crowd a little bit. Have you got any hints and tips around maybe how people can make their applications stand out, how their CVs can be updated or presented in a better way to give themselves a better opportunity of securing interviews with Asda and SVG?
Yeah, sure.
I'm glad you go first, Clive.
Okay. My biggest tips for CVs would be, sometimes it's the basics that let candidates down. I'd always say check your contact numbers. It's so frustrating over the years I've been in recruitment, the amount of times where someone misses out a digit on a phone number or the email address is wrong. Another bugbear, especially in tech for a lot of my hiring managers, is people don't spell check CVs. And often as recruiters, we're having to persuade hiring managers to give that candidate a chance because they've not spell checked it. It might seem a little bit daft that someone would reject over that, but sometimes that's how a manager thinks, that people should have spent that time to check over their CV. So I would always say spell check it, get someone else to read through your CV because they'll probably spot an obvious mistake. I'd also put links into things like GitHub as well if you use that, maybe some personal projects that you've done, but also don't make it too long. If it's over 4 pages, are people going to read that much? And my tip for education as well would be only to include the highest level of education you've got. So if you have got a degree, I don't really want to see what your GCSE grades are. And I would say if you're a new graduate, focus on your education. But if you're an experienced software engineer, if you want to put your education on, that's great. But I'd put that towards the end of your CV, focus more upon your experience.
It's some good tips there, Clive. I think not forgetting the basics is really, really important. Claire, anything to add to that really? Are you seeing more people, I don't know, being really creative? Are people putting videos together, sharing online portfolios, or is that not what you want to see as a hirer right now?
I think that it can be really beneficial, but I think you've also got to look at the platforms that people are using as well, and can the recruitment platforms support that? We've just implemented a new one, but we're not quite there yet with some of the, you can't really attach video to them. You can attach basic CVs and things like that in your LinkedIn profile, but it is compatible, but we've not implemented yet. That's part of our phase 2. So I think it's bearing that in mind, that different organizations will have different recruitment platforms and not all may be able to support exactly what you're trying to do. If you are trying to be a lot more creative, I'd say that the only other tip that I can give that I probably see a bit different to Clive is that because we get, as part of Asda and tech, we're not really specialist. We do have quite a few quite generalist positions as well, where we get very high volumes of CVs against those positions. And I would say really look at the job advert, tailor your CV, tailor your experience, because I think what we see a lot of is people using the same format CV and applying for a lot of positions and not thinking about how they can tailor their specific experience to that specific role.
Yeah, no, that's really, I guess it's just taking a little bit of time, isn't it, over and not underestimating the importance of a CV, given that's the first thing that a hiring manager will see and it will make or break a decision.
The only thing I would add to that is don't be afraid to have gaps in your CV. Years ago, recruiters, if you saw a gap in someone's CV, you'd probably dismiss that candidate and move on to the next candidate. We're trying to recruit a diverse workforce now. We should embrace that people have had gaps. There's often a genuine reason. They might have been a carer, they might have been long-term unemployed. It's giving those people opportunities. So I would say be open and honest. And if you've had those gaps, put them on. But also as recruiters, we should be also wanting to have questions with those candidates, having a chat so we can pick up those diverse candidates rather than just having that quick scan of a CV and rejecting them because we think they might not pass some pre-employment checks due to a big gap of unemployment.
Yeah, no, that's good advice. Good advice. That's also reassuring as well, Clive, because that's a much more, I guess, modern approach to not just thinking it's always a bad reason why somebody's not been able to secure a role. There are lots of genuine reasons, aren't there, why people have taken time out. And I guess thinking about that then, there'll be lots of people out there at the moment that were actively looking for, maybe they're in very secure roles right now, but they were still actively looking for roles prior to, I guess, COVID-19. Maybe it was time to move on, or they needed a new challenge or progression, etc. Do you think now is the right time for people to be out there looking for a new role?
I think it's always a good time to be looking for a new role. I think people have to look at their own personal situation and then establish for themselves if it's the right time. You know, they've got to be, a lot of people balancing family life, homeschooling. They may be in secure employment at the moment. Have they got time to actually interview? But also when they start a new job, you know, there can be quite a steep learning curve as well. And also factor in how you're being treated by your current employer, because that could influence the decision. If you know, you might not have been looking to move companies, but if your company's not looking after you at the moment, it's probably going to accelerate your feelings to look for a new job. And I'd also look at prospective employers, try and find out in the marketplace how they've been looking after their employees during COVID-19. I think a lot of companies can damage their employer brand during this period. And I think people will look at how the companies have treated people, and that will influence the decision if they want to leave. But I think it's got to be the right time for you. But I think the first thing you've got to look at is your own personal situation.
Yeah. Anything to add there, Claire?
I think that there's obviously a lot of people who are maybe being caught out in the middle between starting new positions and then that employment is being cancelled. I think there's probably quite a lot of people out of work. I think the whole contract situation has probably changed as well. At Asda, we really reduced the number of contractors and we dropped it down to an absolute minimum due to the IR35 situation. Because we are still recruiting, as I mentioned, but not all of the positions. So we're looking at having a look at that flexible resource. So I think we've started increasing our contractors, which obviously, Sarah, you're aware about as well. So I think it's, with the contract side, we will probably look at doing that for the next 3 to 6 months. Okay. And then our permanent vacancies will probably increase again. So I think this year we put in additional, about 60 heads we put in. Some of those have been paused because of the current situation, but they will probably still go ahead, but it will be later on down the line.
So just on that, Clive, do you anticipate the same from SBG, that it's more likely to be contract hiring that you do once things are relaxed a little bit and the market starts to improve, or will it be permanent hires that you're focusing on?
We'll focus more on permanent hires. IR35 is going to come back next year. SBG's plan is always to try and invest in a permanent workforce. We'll still use some contractors, but they'll only be for short interim projects rather than relying on them long term.
Yeah,
sure.
And that will be the same at Asda as well. So the plan is not to use them long term. It will be a short term while we get through this.
Okay. I guess whilst people are sitting at home and maybe have more time, lots of people may have been furloughed or unfortunately found themselves out of work. What can prospective candidates do now to prepare for securing a new role, I guess, during this period, whether that's personal development or building out their network or personal branding? What advice have you got for people? How can they maximise on this time?
I'd say try and invest some time into it. Building your own personal brand there's always a good opportunity to update your current LinkedIn profile. If you are looking for opportunities, flick on that switch to say that you are open to opportunities. Get a friend to look through your LinkedIn profile as well. And then in terms of online learning, similar to looking for a job, it has to be right for you. You know, if you're balancing work and a family at the moment, have you got time to invest in some online learning? If you have, that's great. But then you have to identify how you learn. Are you one of those type of people that likes bite-sized chunks? Do you like watching YouTube videos? Personal development, you have to drive a lot of the time yourself. But I would also say if you're in work and you do have access to an L&D team, see what courses they've got on offer for you as well. You know, so try and use your own company's L&D team. But then there's also a lot of free training providers out there that I've seen that have been advertising where you can have access to their sites for free. So I would say definitely it's worth checking out, but it just depends if you've got the time whilst juggling everything else at the moment.
Yeah. What about you, Claire? Just on the LinkedIn point that Clive raised, lots of techie people don't necessarily use LinkedIn. Or, you know,
Yeah.
I know we as recruiters spend a lot of our time trailing through LinkedIn, but do you think LinkedIn is an important platform that candidates really need to be focused on right now?
I think it's the main place where most organisations and recruiters go to first.
Yeah.
If I was a software engineer, would I put my details on LinkedIn in the past? Probably not. Would I do it now? If I'm looking for a role, or if I'm a contractor or looking to go into a permanent position, yes, I would, because that's the main point of call that people go to. I think it is really important, and I think if you're looking to really build your network, then start looking at how you can do that. Have a good look at recruiters' LinkedIn profiles. You can copycat some of the things that they're doing with the pictures, the profiles, the videos, the links. I know Clive's covered quite a few of the links on GitHub as well. So there's lots of things you can do, but I would definitely go on LinkedIn.
And how do people build their networks? Because I guess you don't know the value of your network until you really need it. So lots of people don't invest the time in doing that. Have you got any tips then on how people can best build networks if they don't have them already, particularly online?
I'd say start off small. Look at people you've worked with currently in the past, people you've met at user groups, and then build it from there. Then also, you know, there's no harm in linking with internal recruiters. You know, you can link in with anyone at the Skybending Gaming recruitment team. It's just about investing that time, but try and also connect with the right people, because it can be sometimes hard. You can sometimes get too many connections. If you start from scratch, it's fantastic, but I would say for someone is just make sure that they are going to be someone that's going to add value to your own, you know, your own personal network.
Yeah. Okay. That's good advice. Coming on to being a bit more specific about your organisations, then, can you share what you typically look for in candidates then when you are hiring for tech positions, and then maybe why candidates might get rejected from roles, just so people can...
Michael make Oliver here on his own when we was out with Rachel.
So I had a little visitor.
And in true great example there, Clive, of when virtual digital interviews can go wrong, but I'm sure a very welcome visitor. Claire, sorry, we'll just focus on Asda for now. So what do Asda typically look for when hiring for tech positions, and why do candidates typically get rejected? Are there any common traits?
I think it really does depend on the area, the role. Obviously, we recruit for anything from service desk up to senior director levels. I think the biggest thing that we're looking for is, again, some of the things that we've covered about the experience, some of the organisations that they've worked for. I think the main areas where people tend to get rejected is a lot around things like their salary expectations. So there's a lot of organisations out there that cannot advertise their salaries, they can't advertise the bandings. And from a recruiter's perspective, sometimes we can get anything from, if we look at a PM position, for instance, we could get 100 to 150 applicants for one position, for one PM position. So I think it's a good idea, if you can and you see a position for an organisation, trying to reach out to that recruiter, trying to find a bit more about that position. Maybe if you've got questions about that salary, if you feel that you're not prepared to drop in a salary, or you've got quite a high salary but you don't know what the full benefits package is for that organisation, I would advise everyone to reach out to that organisation, because I think if there's a big difference between your expectations and what they're willing to pay, I think if you do get into a situation where you apply for positions where the recruiter is dealing with very, very high volumes, you could get rejected based on that information.
Okay. So do you think candidates maybe shouldn't put salary expectations on their application? I know sometimes they have to, or...
Yeah. So I think on most recruitment platform, it is a mandatory.
Right.
I said, I know it's mandatory for ours.
Yeah.
I would still put the information on there, but I would try and reach out to that recruiter. And I think one of the most important things that I would maybe put across is that once you've reached out to that individual, don't just leave it at that, follow it up again. There's a lot of people that don't follow it up, and they're the people that you really remember as a recruiter as well.
Yeah, I think people have got to be really persistent in this market, haven't they? And kind of building your personal brand and building your relationships with people is really important.
Yeah.
Clive, just we were talking about what typically companies such as SBG look for when hiring for tech positions, and maybe some of the common reasons why candidates might get rejected from roles.
It's a mixture of things. The obvious ones are that they've not got the relevant tech skills, so they might not be front end, back end, or mobile. Can be experience levels. You know, the roles may be mid to senior, and it's someone who's maybe entry level that's applied. No experience of maybe open source technologies that we use. I think, like Claire mentioned, salary expectations can sometimes reject people. Is having realistic salary expectations. So, for example, if you've been a contractor, you're not going to get a contractor rate as a permanent salary, but then you've got to factor in the security of the permanent job, the benefits package into the salary that you're looking for. I think some candidates get rejected as well for a lack of commitment. Previously, it was great for a lot of candidates. You probably had more opportunities, in front of you, and we were all fighting for that talent. So sometimes you'd engage with a candidate, get them to very, far levels of the recruitment process, and they just suddenly disappear and ghost you. So if you are actively looking, I would say, try and keep close to your recruiter, try and be interested, because it can be frustrating with the time and effort we put in, and then also you just go quiet on us. So that tends to be why some people get rejected. They sort of self-reject themselves.
Okay, just what you start to see some behaviours that maybe demonstrate a lack of commitment. Does that make you, as a recruiter, nervous? So maybe you withdraw from that candidate?
I'd say for like software engineers, we'll always give software engineers the benefit of the doubt. We'll give them lots of chances to have that tech test come back, or come to do the face-to-face interview or the coffee chat. But sometimes there's only so much chasing you can do for someone. And if someone doesn't want to return that tech test, my team will always chase, but it gets to the point where you can't chase forever. So I think for candidates, if you don't want to do it or you can't do it, it's just being honest and coming back to, look, I haven't got time, or it's the test is too hard, so actually I want to withdraw my application. Yeah.
Okay. We talked about, you mentioned there about maybe junior candidates, and someone's posed a question actually, who has completed one of the 14-week development boot camps, which have been really popular. But then obviously, given current market conditions, he's struggling a little bit to get any engagement going with organisations. He's been upskilling using Udemy and building his own websites. So he's doing some personal projects, which is advice that we would give. Is there anything else he can do, or that you would suggest he does to increase his chances of securing a new role?
I would say definitely go to some of the local community groups, so to build his or her network with people within the Leeds and the Yorkshire market. Register with agencies. I would say obviously look at what companies advertising. You can join their talent communities. You can register your interest for future roles that come up. If they've been on a boot camp from a training provider, reach back out to that training provider to see what options and who they've got in their network that they've hired the staff from before as well.
Yeah. Claire, anything you can suggest for junior, maybe a junior developer? Is it normal, do you think, that a junior developer would struggle in this in the tech industry in Leeds? I would say definitely not.
No.
And it's probably just an impact of COVID, and maybe it's just sit tight a little bit. But
yeah, I think
anything you can add?
I think it is going to be quite challenging for junior individuals that may be starting out for the next few months. So when we look at Asda an organisation and the positions that we're recruiting for, we're not really taking on those more junior levels that we would before. It's more the kind of specialist areas. We will recruit them by the time it comes about August, September time. But for the moment, it's more of the specialist roles and more of the experienced individuals that we're looking for. So I would just say, hang on there, things will change. Organisations will start recruiting for them, but it may be really slowed down for those kind of positions coming through over the next couple of months.
Yeah. I'd probably just in addition suggest maybe doing any sort of volunteering work that you can, just to get some work experience, because that always helps, doesn't it? Even if it's for small businesses that might need a website building, or charity, or approach companies directly. It shows initiative as well, which I think will put someone in really good stead when we come out of this.
Yeah, we've had some junior positions in the past where we've had individuals that haven't been successful, and we've kind of paired them up with people in that development team, and they've shared their work with them. Again, so it's how you can build that up and how you can build your network up. Maybe reach out to individuals in those organisations that you are interested in working for, and see if you can kind of share learnings from them, and if they can check some of your work. There's a lot of people that will be really open to do that as well.
That's great. That's great.
I think it's about being an active member of the tech community.
And
getting out to those meetups, whether they're in person or a virtual meetup, is a key thing. But also try and keep up with the learning at home. So you might not be start that new junior role, but you can still do some things at home to keep your skills fresh. And don't be afraid to take some unpaid work, because it could lead to permanent employment as well.
Absolutely. There was Lead Sharp was last night. The JVM thing was last night. I think there's about 100 people all virtually meeting, and it's a great opportunity to learn, but also to kind of build your network as well. So I guess just a bit more specific questions around when candidates are applying for work. Just trying to think. When you're shortlisting a candidate, 'cause obviously you're getting lots of applications, what are the key factors that you're considering when you're looking at a CV or an application, and what makes you rule somebody in or out?
It depends on, do they match the brief we've been given by the hiring manager, is the key one. Can we get hold of them? Sometimes with some roles, we put adverts out, and even with the power of the Skybit brand, people don't apply. It may be different in the new market. So sometimes we're having to headhunt people, and often these people aren't that engaged to look for a new opportunity. So we may ever get one candidate to say final interview stage for that specific role. Hopefully things may change where we're inundated with candidates for some of the software engineers and the DevOps roles in the future.
Okay. And when candidates get to interview stage, are there any preparation tips you can share, things that they should be doing? Obviously the basics are really important, like we've already touched on with the CVs. Anything you can add to that, really?
I'd say do your homework on the organisation, use your network, find out who's currently working for that organisation, what they know, what they've been doing, any community work, so that when you are in that interview, you can talk about things that you found out. We had a manager, for instance, that mentioned that he'd got an individual to a final stage interview, and they'd done no homework on the organisation whatsoever, and that's quite a big, it was quite off-putting for that. So definitely do your homework and use your network to do it.
Okay.
I'd I'd say for me, speak to your recruiter, use them, try and get some tips from them. That's what they're paid to do, is help you through the recruitment process.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely have a read of the job description. But I always give candidates, my tip that I've said for many years is read your own CV prior to the interview. Your CV is a document that you don't use on a daily basis. I'm not saying memorize it from top to toe, but just have a read through it before you go to that interview. And also, be comfortable speaking about what you've put on there, because the questions the interviewer will ask you will not always be about the things at the top of your CV, but the things that are of interest. Also, if you're putting things on your CV, make sure you've done it. Don't list everything you've ever briefly covered off, because the person who's interviewing is going to be quite technical, and they may home in some random thing that you've only ever done for a week, and then you're making out you're an expert. My other interview tips is, when it's a face-to-face interview, is be prepared, set off in advance. It is a bugbear for a lot of hiring managers, people turning up late. You can always find a coffee shop when coffee shops reopen. Give yourself that time to read your CV again, read through the job description. Or if it's a video interview, make sure you've set aside time, not to be disturbed like I was disturbed earlier. But be honest in that interview. You know, the person you're going to be interviewing will be very technical, and they're not going to try and trip you up, but be honest if you've not done that, and try and think of a problem of how you'd fix it. But sometimes you can sort of dig yourself a grave if you try and pretend you've done it and you've not done it, and it can put people off. We're really looking for people who are going to be honest. And my other final tip I always say to candidates is, prepare some questions in advance, write them down on a piece of paper, bring them with you, because there's nothing more frustrating when you say to a candidate, have you got any questions? And they say, no, you've covered them off. There must be one question you'd like to ask. You know, I would say, write down, can you describe to me a typical day at Sky Betting and Gaming? And then think of some others yourself. But the good thing is, if you've got questions prepared, is the hiring managers can see you've got the questions prepared. If the question's not relevant, you can clearly say, I did have a few questions prepared, we've covered most of them off. And then it gives you that breather to think of something off the top of your head, or go in with that obvious one. Can you describe a typical day at your company?
That's great. I think people sometimes are worried, aren't they, that they shouldn't have notes in an interview, or a copy of their CV or their questions written down. But I think it's fine for people to come, you know, prepared with a notebook or a copy of their CV in front of them. I think that's something important to remember. I guess just to add to that, just think about dropping the person who you're going to interview with maybe a connection request beforehand, and a follow-up afterwards, even if that email is to the recruiter or to the person that interviewed you, just thanking them for their time, and, you know, if they've got any concerns or questions, volunteering your availability to kind of pick that up with them. I think that's really important. And is there anything specific advice you would give that for somebody that wanted to join SBG and Asda now, that they can be doing, or what, you know, creative ways that they can be at the forefront of your minds?
Yeah, sure. So the obvious one for people wanting to join Sky Betting Gaming is we have a thing called a talent community. So if you go to our career site, you basically register your interest. You then get content on a weekly basis. You get notified of latest jobs that are coming up. Most company career sites have something similar. So I would say definitely have a look around. Who are the Yorkshire players? Have a register on their career site, even if there's no active roles. Don't be afraid to use things like Indeed, which scrapes numbers, job sites and job boards. So you don't always have to specifically look at each company's career site. Most of that data will scrape into one place. I would say build networks with people that work at the companies you want to work for. Most companies offer quite an attractive refer a friend scheme that can sometimes be in the thousands of pounds. So build your network with people that work at that company, get chatting to them. They can probably register you, refer you for a role that doesn't even exist yet. They'll help you through the process of getting the role, give you some tips. They also get some cash for helping the business out. So I'd say definitely look at that. We also have a chatbot on our website. So I'd say chat to the chatbot. But the other thing is reach out to the internal recruiters, try and build relationships with them, try and chat to them. The other thing is we hold our own events too. So when we're back in the office, come to some of the mobile monthly meetups that we have. We're going to be launching a career spotlight session from next week, where each week a career will be in focus. The first one's going to be a UX and design talk. So even if we're not hiring in that role, you can find out a little bit more about what those individuals do on a daily basis. Lots of companies are doing similar things, but I would say for me, the key thing would be is try and reach out to people who work at the company, build those networks as well, not just with the recruiters.
Fab. I love the sound of the career spotlight session, Clive. So is that going to be like on Zoom? Is that something that people can?
It's going to start off on YouTube Live, but we're going to move it to Zoom.
Okay.
We just had some technical problems with Zoom, but that's online. You can look at Eventbrite or go on our career site, and then you can register your interest. And then each week you'll find out what the next one up that is coming up, and it's going to be at the same time each week as well.
That's brilliant. Claire, anything to add there before we move on to questions from the attendees?
Yeah, I think it's probably quite a different situation at Asda. We are still recruiting, so our permanent positions are currently being advertised in Asda.jobs. We are, if you look at the tech team as a whole and what's going on with the supermarkets at the moment, all our technical colleagues are at full capacity. It's absolutely mental at Asda at the moment. We've got a lot of individuals working 7 days a week and absolutely ridiculous hours. So I would say reach out to them, but just bear in mind that it is really, really busy for everyone at Asda at the moment. So just bear with us and we will get back to you, but it's very challenging.
Fab. We've got a couple of questions that people have posted on the chat, but if anybody wants to unmute and ask a question directly to Claire or Clive or me, now's a good time to do that if anybody wants to do that. If not, I can take some of the questions from the chat.
Hi, it's Vinod. I've got a couple of questions.
Hi, Vinod.
Hi. You know, I've been a contractor for the last 15 years or so. I never was a consultant previously, so I've been in IT for about 40 years. My question is, you know, looking at some of the job adverts that we're seeing come through, the description of the job is so varied, and the skill sets that they're looking for, especially around contracting roles, it looks like typically most of the times the job entails about 4 or 5 different disciplines. So it's very difficult, I think, sometimes not to show your CV with all your total experience on that. Well, have you got any advice on that? You know, looking at job descriptions on some adverts, you typically look at it for a test manager or a test lead, and it's got more of a program manager's activities in there. You know, they typically want somebody of a jack of all trades type of thing.
Yeah, I think sometimes recruiters don't help the situation. We often copy a job description and that becomes the job advert. A job advert should be something different. It should be actually that sells you in, whets your appetite, so you want to actually get that job description. And I think sometimes some companies, and sometimes we make that mistake at Skybet as well, the job description never really gets updated. It's quite an old job description. It's being created as a bit of a hybrid. It's 2 hiring managers have used it, put it together, and then someone else uses it. I think it comes down to the talent delivery partners or recruiters having a conversation up front with the hiring manager, making sure the job description and the job advert are correct, but also getting a detailed brief before we go out to market. So I think sometimes that's the reason why you may see the job description that's a bit of a jack of all trades.
Yeah, and the other question I had was, in, you know, the market's obviously changing. There's jobs, especially in the contract market, there's going to be short-term contracts rather than long-term contracts, you know, going back to probably 10, 15 years ago of having these kind of roles. Is there something that a candidate can actually do in terms of doing employment checks up front? You know, is there some standard? I know security checks you can't, SC clearance you can't get unless you're actually sponsored by a client. Yeah, but is there any other clearance or checks that an individual can do and be prepared for these kind of roles and be actually saying, right, okay, I've got these 5 things, or isn't there anything that you can do until you get a job?
I think the problem you've got is every company has a different pre-employment process.
Right.
So the things that we look for and you have to pass may be different to Asda, they may be different to BGSS, they may be different to Infinity Works. There are some consistencies, but the only problem is some of the data that that company will get. So most people will want some reference checks.
Yeah.
That company will then request that data and hold it. We wouldn't be able to use your own reference requests. We'd have to go out and request them ourselves.
Okay.
Also, a lot of companies want a disclosure of Scotland, and it has to be an up-to-date version. It's only really valid on the day that you receive it back as well. So there isn't anything much you can do. I'd say the only thing you can probably do to help yourself is just have an up-to-date list of all those contact details for referees, and make sure they're close to hand as well, because that can save time when the pre-employment checks start.
Okay. And again, I've seen jobs being advertised, you know, saying that need security clearance, which in its own right is a security violation anyway, because you're not supposed to specify that you're security cleared on your CVs and that kind of thing, you know. So there's not really a way around some of these things, is there, until you're actually employed or you're at the final stages.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I think the reference point is a really important one, particularly if Vinod, you're applying for contracts. Companies moving forward are going to want to work with contractors that are tried and tested, and you know, have really, really solid references. So maybe getting some testimonials on your LinkedIn profile, because companies do check things like that, just in terms of accelerating your chance of securing an interview. That's probably a really good thing to do now.
Yeah. References I'm okay with, because I keep that on hand, and then obviously once you get to the next stages of interviews or shortlisted, recruiters ask for references.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it was more on the security clearance type of things. If as an individual you could actually do something to try and elevate the position, if you know what I mean, in terms of saying, okay, you've been offered this job, but you can't actually start because all these other checks need to be done first.
Sure.
Yeah.
There's a good question from Bill, actually. Obviously, Bill's somebody that's posed a question. He's an experienced program manager normally. Given the current circumstances, he has done some volunteering work for York Council and delivering food for vulnerable adults, and also to keep some cash flow going in, he's doing some work for Morrison's. How do you think that is going to be perceived by recruiters when all this is over? I think Bill might be concerned that might be perceived negatively.
No. I think it's really challenging for everyone out there at the moment who are out of work. I've got my husband that's self-employed. He's getting no income whatsoever. And a lot of contractors be in the same situation as well. I just think this is a time when you do need to go out. You do need to. And if it means just getting a bit of money to pay for your family and your food, I think everybody will totally understand that. And if you are getting out and doing that, so I think it's great.
I think the volunteering's a really good thing to do as well, isn't it? Right now, giving something back when you have the time to do it is an amazing thing to do.
Yeah.
I think recruiters need to, to look for all this rather than reject those people. Like I mentioned earlier, don't be ashamed of the gaps in your CV. Just because you're working, delivering shopping, and normally you're a program manager, be proud to put it on your CV. You're bringing some income in for yourself and your family. And if a recruiter's dismissing you because of that, you don't want to work with that recruiter or that organisation. Yeah.
I think this is a time that we'll all look back on, won't we? And there'll be much more empathy than in any other normal situation. So I think it's a good thing that you're keeping busy. There's a question here from Rui, and this is probably quite a common question. When people are trying to put their CVs together, what do you think works best? A one-page CV, very succinct, or a two-pager with more descriptive, with more text, achievements, etc.? It's hard with CVs, isn't it? Because we've all, tried to write a CV or received a CV. What's the right balance, Clive, do you think?
It's hard to say because it depends on the recruiter, what they're like, and you're dealing with different recruiters. We're also looking at a format where we may get rid of CVs and give candidates like a pick and mix option of how they want to apply, whether it be CV, LinkedIn profile, a portfolio, or even a video interview. But a little bit like Claire said earlier, it depends on the recruitment platform you use. So we're just testing at the moment if we can support that. In terms of the length of CV, it's a tough one. I think you've got to sometimes make the call yourself. The CVs that I always particularly enjoyed reading were people that worked in the UX space and design space.
Yes.
Their CVs are so nicely designed, very creative. If you've seen one, you'll know what they look like. They do definitely stand out from the crowd, but I don't know if a software engineer should do the same as them.
Claire, you gave some good advice earlier, actually. Just, make sure you tailor every CV to the specific role that you're applying for.
Yeah.
Don't just use a generic copy.
No.
That's really important, isn't it?
I would personally always prefer a CV that was 2 to 3 pages long than one CV. I think sometimes you're probably not getting as much information across as you could, especially if you were putting an application forward for more of a BA PM type position where you might get a high amount of applications. Is your information, your experience going to shine through? So I would probably go for, me personally, I would probably go for a CV about 2 to 3 pages long.
Okay, I think I'd agree.
I think it depends on what you do as well. You
Yeah.
know, I've hired people in the past without a CV, and we've never seen the CV. I think for sometimes the people who are software engineers and DevOps, I wouldn't be chasing those people for a CV. I'd rather try and get them having that initial coffee chat with a hiring manager. So I'd say definitely reach out to people to have those chats. CV is great, but don't always let it be a barrier to you getting to that next stage.
You have a question, Sarah, if it's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Oh yeah, it's Andrew Falls. So
Hi, Andrew.
Going back to the question regarding, because I was the one who posted about the software boot camp, and
right.
I appreciate that having not as much industry experience at the moment, it's quite hard to find junior positions that will take you on. Because I think Elliot in the chat put it quite well. You need to find experience to get a job, but you need a job to get experience. And for Clive and Claire, is the restriction on junior roles due to a financial issue, or is it due to the fact that the teams at the moment just can't not have the time to onboard these junior members? And would it be appropriate, or would you advise maybe approaching some companies and saying, I don't mind working for free if you can just take me on and get me some experience, with maybe later on down the line there being a permanent position there, if cost is really the issue, I suppose?
I don't necessarily think I can only comment for Asda, it's not a cost issue for Asda. It's because the tech team is so stretched at the moment with all the requests that are coming through, and it's not the norm for us. Everything that we set forward for our strategy and all the projects that the team are working on, a lot of them have they've gone out the window because they've got to work on what's happening now. And if we brought in a junior member without that much experience when they need the support of the team, with the team being so pressured that they are, is that really a good time to take those junior individuals on that need the support from those teams? And that's probably the reason why some of the junior positions aren't coming live. It's not due to cost. Okay. It's due to constraints within time within those teams. So I think that's a main thing for me. But I'd advise you to reach out. If you've got organisations that you want to work for, find out who works for them, network, go to some of the network groups, go and have a chat with them about what's going on there. That's where the networking can really make a difference.
I think as well, Claire, there's quite a few questions that have come up on this about getting that experience. Demonstrating initiative right now is what will stand you out from the crowd with other junior candidates. So making those approaches, use LinkedIn. After this, if anybody wants to have a chat with anybody at Fruition IT, we can give you some pointers on, go into a bit more detail on the specific things that you can do in the activities and how you can start to market yourself out, and particularly the volunteering and doing work unpaid is a really good way of doing that. So I can pick up with that afterwards.
Yeah.
Hi, Sarah. It's Vic Sharma. I've got a couple of questions. Hi there. Firstly, thank you for running this webinar, and thank you to Clive and Clare for sharing some, brilliant, tips and hints and tips. I've got a couple of questions, general ones. One is on supply and demand. I mean, firstly on demand, on the tech trends. So, a question for both Clare and Clive. Have you noticed anything in particular in terms of a shift of focus for certain, specific skills and capabilities in tech, or certain skills in more in demand, given the COVID lockdown and the change in working patterns?
I wouldn't say that the demand has changed as such. We're still recruiting for dev, test, data, PMs. We're even recruiting for service desk at the moment. So I wouldn't say that the demands have changed dramatically. I think it's just the teams are not quite sure what they need to recruit for at the moment due to what's going on. I think that's probably the situation that I'm seeing, that they're unsure. The whole 3-5 year strategy of a lot of tech teams has now dramatically changed.
I understand.
Don't know what the new looks like.
I think as well, we're waiting to see what happens once we can sort of go back to some type of normality. We're waiting for the lockdown to be lifted. So a lot of companies like ourselves, we have a temporary recruitment freeze on. The recruitment freeze will get unposted at some point and the roles will come back. So until we dip our toe in the market, we don't know who's going to be about, what it's going to be like. And I think there's a lot of companies, you've only got to look on Indeed at the moment. There's not a lot of jobs that are being advertised. But I think in a couple of weeks' time, you will start to see a change. People are going to start moving, or they've not been treated too well by their present company. That person leaves, it will create a backfill, then it creates that circle again as well. So people will need to start hiring again.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would say that I'm seeing a massive change at is that if I post a position at this moment in time, I'm getting the amount of applications is, I've never seen anything like it.
Understand, yeah.
But it's not all experienced people. The people that are applying, it could be anyone, with even individuals with no IT experience. So I just think it's just, if you do see positions that recruiters are advertising, reach out to those, because they're probably, for somebody like myself that's still recruiting, I'm going through hundreds and hundreds of CVs a day. So it's just reaching out to those.
Okay, no, thanks for that. And I think you indirectly answered my next question, which was, have you seen a shift in quality of on the supply side, in the quality of candidates coming through? And I think you've just answered that.
Yeah, a high amount of applications at the moment.
High amount of application, the quality is not up to mark. Right?
Yeah.
So, and just a related question, in terms of, you mentioned earlier that there's some of the roles are full-time remote, but then if it's a full-time remote, what's stopping the company from fully outsourcing that, that role versus hiring a local, UK employee? So any shift in focus or priorities in terms of outsourcing certain roles in tech?
I think it's too early to say for us. We use TCS. They are on and offshore. We use them for a lot of our projects. Will that change going forward? I don't know. But we want that in-house. We want that in-house capability. A few years back, we had no development team whatsoever, and we decided to bring it in-house. And a lot of the roles as well that we used contractors for, again, we've created permanent positions, and that's something that we want to carry on going forward with. So as it stands, I can't see it changing, but who knows?
I've got one more quick question, more kind of HR question. I guess it's quite relevant. Companies are spending a lot of time, a lot of effort in, getting involving and engaging their employees because of this, new way of working. But any hints and tips you can give us in terms of, from the employee side, what they can do to facilitate, help on that engagement side, so we can, practice those skills now. In terms of remote working, what would you expect an employee to do from an engagement perspective?
I think it all depends on your own personal situation. At Skybit we're doing lots of health and wellbeing initiatives, but people with families, it's quite hard sometimes to get engaged with. You know, it's a yoga session. You know, if you've got kids and you're trying to do homeschooling, you might not be able to do it. I think it's us about embracing the technology. We're more familiar, like we are now, using video chat, so it's keeping engaged with your teams, and just trying to communicate, but then also not over communication, because I think quite a few people are getting a little bit of Zoom fatigue at the moment. So it's just finding like a happy balance.
Yeah. We're doing the same, Asda. We're doing exactly what Clive has said. We're doing yoga sessions and fitness sessions and quiz sessions, and I think it's great. I think what you've got to consider is that there's people that live by themselves and they're totally isolated, and there's individuals like myself and Clive that have got children, and it's absolutely mental. And I'm there working all day, and it's really busy, and I've got the pressures of maybe not doing as much homeworking with my children as I should be. It's just really challenging. I think that all organisations are thinking about their colleagues, and a big topic is mental health, and how after this, how can we help individuals' mental health? That's a massive thing.
Right, great, thank you.
One of my tips, and I do this with my team and the wider team at Skybase, we do a thing called coffee roulette. So we use a basic scheduling tool that you can Google, and we create some fixtures. So you have a 15-minute chat with either somebody in your team or somebody in the wider team that you don't know that well, just once a day. Have a coffee with them, chat. You don't need to chat work, find out a little bit more about them, because whilst we're sat at home, you're just surrounded with your own, basically all the people live in your household. Like Claire said, there's a lot of people that live on their own, so they're quite isolated. And sometimes these coffee chats can just make all the difference for those people. So it's trying to keep them engaged. They might not want to do yoga, but they might just be open to having a chat with someone that they might have that water cooler chat with as they walk past them in the normal office, but they're not having that interaction because we're not in the office anymore.
Okay, thanks, Clive.
Thanks, Vic. Just one more question, actually. That's a really good point. Obviously, we're all mastering the art of remote working now, and if that becomes the norm, do you think employers will be open to employing people purely on a remote basis moving forward? Is that something SBG and Asda would do?
We're in talks about that at the moment. That's something that's high up in our agenda, is that if we are going to be moving a lot more to remote working, can we do that? Is there any reason for somebody to be in Asda House 1 or 2 days a week? I'm not quite sure. I do see that changing, but it's something that we are working on at the moment.
I think for us, it's going to definitely change how we think about remote working. It used to often be case by case. In my team, we used to practice it at least once, twice a week. In other teams, people weren't so keen on it because we like to work quite collaborative together. But I think this has probably advanced us maybe 5 years with our thinking, because we've been thrown into it, and actually we've proved that we're quite successful at it. We've not even got a date that we're going to return to the office because we're successful at the moment. We're working remotely, so I think for us actually it could be a benefit, and also hopefully open up a bigger, wider candidate market of those people that don't want to work in Leeds 5 days a week.
Yeah. I know there's conversations going on with the local council as well about how they're going to cut down pollution in Leeds. So that's something that I know they are working with a lot of organisations to cut congestion in Leeds, because they've seen a massive turn recently. So I think that's going to be the same for all organisations.
So any more questions before we wrap up this session from anybody? Give us a wave or unmute.
Hi there, guys. It's Chandeep Bogle speaking. I did want to ask a question, just following up from what you were saying about congestion and pollution around Leeds city centre, and that's certainly much better than what it was because everyone's working from home. But I'm an IT project manager contractor, and I wanted to understand from your perspective, certainly from Fruition IT and from the organisations Asda and Skybet as well, how will the market change, do you think, for contractors when there's going to be more working from home? And, you know, because I'm conscious that there'll be less appetite for contractors because of that trust relationship, etc., rather than a permanent employee. That could have an effect on the contractor market overall. What are your thoughts with that?
So, what I think will happen, and given that we've seen a bit of a shift with this anyway, particularly with IR35 due to come in April, and then obviously that's been delayed a year, I think organisations will engage with contractors on a much more deliverable based way, where actually you'll be paid based on hitting milestones and deliverables. That'll be much more results based, which will open up the opportunity more for remote working with contractors. And I think you'll see more companies engaging with contractors through a statement of work as opposed to a time and material based contract, which I think is probably going to be the biggest change. What do you think, Claire, Clive? I think that's right.
Yeah, we've even been recruiting for contractors over the last couple of weeks that with Sarah at the moment. So I don't think it's changed for us, but I think from Asda's perspective, it's going to be a short-term fix. It's going to be maybe up until like March next year, and then we'll go back to permanent as well. But if we need that flexible resource, we will still take contracts on during this period. And I think that a lot of teams and new colleagues, there's no difference between a permanent colleague joining and a contractor joining. You still need upskilling, you still need training, you still need to know the systems. So there's no difference from what I can see.
I think for us, we would just look at as contractors as being a short-term resource. I think previously we've had a lot of contractors that have stayed long-term. There's a couple of individuals that have probably been at Skybet nearly as long as I have. But I think it'll just be going down the route of statement of works, using consultancies, and we'll still have some contractors, but not in the numbers we had in the past. But as a Leeds-based business, we never had a high contractor population anyway. Our model's always been permanent recruitment.
Right, yeah, and that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. And I do also want to say thank you to you all for a really good and insightful webinar. It's been really, really useful. I do have one more question, if I may. So with that in mind, and for contractors who are going to be more short-term going forward, which certainly seems to be the trend, what advice could you give for contractors who may be wanting to go back to permanent work, but maybe taking on where they qualify for more career progressive roles, like, for example, going into more maybe program management or IT management or more team management as opposed to just a typical delivery project manager? What advice could you give for people who may have that kind of ambition?
I'd say try and get your foot in the door initially. Once you're in, there's lots of opportunities that open up to you. Our head of delivery came in as a contractor and then worked his way up, became perm, and he's had those doors that have opened up to him. Those doors probably wouldn't have been open to him if he'd just wanted to, get in to start, at the top. So I just get applying, get your foot in the door with those companies. There's lots of roles we never ever advertise externally.
Right.
Yeah, same Asda. We've converted 5 contractors in 2 weeks into permanent positions. So again, just get your foot in the door, and maybe short term you need to think about that you will probably take a big drop in your earnings, but long term, if it means that you can secure yourself a permanent position in an organisation that you want to work for, then is it worth it? And I think at this moment in time it is.
Okay.
And it depends how ambitious you are as well. But like I say, once you're in the door, you can open up your own opportunities as well, just by getting yourself known, getting yourself involved in other projects within the business.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Chandy. Thank you. Well, I think we'll wrap up the session there because I'm just mindful of people's time. So a big thank you for everyone attending, but especially to Clare and Clive for taking your time out today. Really, really appreciate that. I know it's really difficult at home with kids and juggling homeschooling and working. So thank you very much. It's been really insightful. had some really good feedback on the chat that we'll share afterwards, and we will follow up with a survey just to get your feedback. So we want to do more of these sessions and make them more relevant to what people need right now. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye now. Thanks everyone.
Bye.